Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Jason, and today I just want to share the story of my spiritual awakening experience. So, brief introduction to the subject of awakening for those who might be less familiar. Probably in our current day and age, the single most well-known thing that I guess instilled this idea of awakening into the collective human psyche is, I would say, certainly the Matrix film. And it's a good analogy. It's a wonderful analogy. It's not a perfect allegory for the truth, I don't think, but it contains a lot of wonderful allegorical truths, I guess you could say. And the idea presented in the Matrix film that humanity is sleeping and must awake from that sleep, I would say, is completely accurate. Perhaps some of the ways that's presented is not entirely accurate, but that's a great analogy. I think that's pretty much, in a way, exactly what awakening is at the deepest level. It's awakening from a dream, essentially. Dream of separation is a good way to put it. Awakening to reality would be another way of putting it. The dream, of course, being not ultimate reality, but rather a reflection of it. Of course, a dream is real in the sense that we really experience it. When we dream at night, it's not that it's not happening. It's absolutely happening in our mind. We're definitely experiencing the dream. It's a real experience. But when we wake up, we realize that the experience we had wasn't of what we call reality in our waking life. And on a spiritual level, it's much the same way. When you wake up, you realize, oh wow, this is a dream. My waking reality is a dream. My former waking reality was a dream, and now I'm aware of it. So in that sense, one could say a perfect analogy for awakening is becoming lucid in the dream. Very much it's becoming awake to the present moment. That's a huge aspect of it. Living fully in the present moment, I would say, is living in the awakened state, without memories of the past, particularly guilt and whatnot, and worries, fears of the future. Without fear of the future and regrets of the past, we can be anchored in the present moment, and we can be fully present in life right in front of us. And that's, to me, that's the awakened state. It's definitely realizing that everything is one at some level, that all is one, that I am you and you are me, and we are all a part of life and God, whatever word you want to give it, the universe, the single verse that this life is. It's all one. So anything that's causing us to realize at some level that we're connected with everything else, that all of life is interconnected, that's to some degree awakening. The concept of spiritual awakening is found throughout many spiritual traditions, probably definitely most well known perhaps in the Eastern traditions, most pronounced in the Eastern traditions. In the Hindu traditions, the concept of Maya. Maya is the illusory world. It's the dream world, essentially. It's the identification with the dream as the ultimate reality. In Buddhism, the title Buddha, given to Gautama, means literally the awakened one. In fact, the entire message of the Buddha can be summarized by a single teaching of his, found in one of my favorite sayings.
that you are all Buddhas, just open your eyes. Essentially, you are all awakened ones, just open your eyes to the reality that your perception as a separate ego in a material universe is a dream.
So it's very much foundational to the Eastern traditions, but it's also, maybe it's not focused upon in the institutionalized versions of the Western religious traditions, but it's still there. I grew up in more of the fundamentalist, evangelical, Protestant version of Christianity, and I never recalled hearing a single sermon on spiritual awakening or anything like that. But it's there in the Bible. One of my favorite verses is actually one on spiritual awakening. It's where Paul, it's not a saying of Paul, original to Paul, but it's found in the writings of Paul, known as the Apostle, who helped spread the early Christian movement far and wide. One of my favorite passages, I forget where exactly in the Bible, but he's quoting a saying that must be well known in his circles in the early Jesus movement. Awake, O sleeper, and rise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you. Christ here, of course, being our inner divine light, obviously will shine on us, the same light Jesus talks about in the Sermon on the Mount and elsewhere that's within us. But that's not the only place in the Bible that speaks of awakening. Jesus, or at the very least the author of the Gospel of John, also speaks of awakening and links it to being raised from the dead, being raised into spiritual life, just as that verse does. Paul is clearly linking sleep with death and awaking with rising from the dead. In the story of Lazarus, we find the same thing. At the beginning of that story, Jesus says to his disciples, Lazarus has fallen asleep, let us go that I may awaken him. And then a few verses later says, he tells them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And then it's the whole story of resurrection from the dead. But clearly, the author wanted the reader to link Lazarus' being raised from the dead with Lazarus being awakened from a state of sleep. And I think at the deeper level, well, they're one and the same in that sense. And then, of course, there's a saying in the Synoptics where Jesus just plainly says, stay awake at all times. And clearly he's not advocating for people to never physically sleep. That would be unhealthy. Even advanced yogis that sleep little still sleep, a little bit, sleep a few hours at night. And so, obviously, this is a deeper spiritual truth that he's alluding to. He's not advising his disciples to never close their eyes and get physical rest in that form. And then we have also the parable of the wheat and the tares. Very interesting. I think it's missed by many people reading this. But there's the story, the parable. There's the good seed and the bad seed, and they're both thrown into the field, and the weeds grow up beside the good seed, and until they both grow up side by side into more maturity, they're both there, entangled, the roots entangled, I think, is what it's alluding to. But in any event, he says very clearly that this happened, that the enemy sowed the tares, or the seeds of the weeds. The enemy did this while men slept. And so I find that very interesting. I think a very overlooked allusion to spiritual awakening, and the fact that the enemy, I take as the ego, and all of the voice of fear essentially in our minds, the program that arises from the fear of death, the belief in separation. That's the enemy that sows the weeds, and the weeds are all of the fear thoughts that cause us to reinforce our belief in separation, our belief that the dream is real, essentially, the dream of separation is real, and thus attached to it, the more attached we are to the belief in separation, the more difficult it is to awaken. Anyway, so I think that gives listeners a good little overview of, this isn't just isolated to one tradition here, one there, and this is widespread. I'm sure it's found elsewhere as well. Those aren't like the only, obviously, religions in the world, the only spiritual traditions out there. There's more. But those are the ones I'm familiar with, and particularly being a follower of the teachings of Jesus as kind of the foundational to my spiritual practice, I'm especially, of course, familiar with those references in the Christian Bible. But, ones who have not yet awakened to any degree can't really know what it's like. So that's why I want to share my story, and that's what we'll get into now. So, there's different ways it happens for everyone. That's why I think it's important for all of us on this awakening journey, because it's not like a one point, you're awake, that's it, done, bam, the end. No, it's like, maybe for some very few rare people it's like that, but I think for the vast majority of us, it's definitely a journey. There might be a moment in time where it's like unawakening, and I'm now can never go back to sleep, but it doesn't mean we're fully awake, as awake as we can be. Definitely fall back into thought out of the present moment. Typically, this is at least for me and many others. So there can be also more gradual and more abrupt awakenings. The more abrupt it is, I think, the further that first, awakening experience propels us into that awakened state. But even then, with really abrupt awakening, like out-of-body, near-death experiences, these sort of things that really shake up our worldview so radically and make us see everything we thought, the way we thought it was, is absolutely, totally not the case, and the truth is far more simple than what we ever thought, and far beyond what we could ever have comprehended. Even then, near-death experiencers, it's not instantly, then living perfectly anchored in the present moment in a state of perfect peace. A lot of people coming from an awakening experience, whatever it may be specifically, even abrupt ones, it's a long journey of awakening from that point. It's like, I like to say, it's like what Morpheus said to Neo in the film, I can show you the door, but only you can walk through it. And that's how I tend to see like mine and many other initial awakenings. It's like being shown the door, being shown a glimpse of, to use the terms of Jesus, being shown a glimpse of the kingdom of heaven that's within us and within everything around us. It's being shown a glimpse of the kingdom, seeing the kingdom. But seeing the kingdom and actually, living in the kingdom full time, that can be two totally different things. So anyway, for me, I've had a somewhat gradual spiritual awakening, but I had definitely an abrupt awakening experience. It was definitely not like the single only experience, but at the time that what I call my spiritual awakening, my initial spiritual awakening experience, that occurred quite a few years ago now. Was it maybe 2018, the Christmas of 2018? At that point, I was already I had already, heard the voice of God. I was already at some level aware and connected to the divine inner voice, I would say. That's what I would call it. The still small voice of truth. As, still small voice, how it's described in the Bible. But intuition definitely speaks through intuition. So that voice had essentially called me. I had left, long ago I had left the Christian religion and gone into agnosticism, essentially. that voice called me back to Jesus and his teachings, but free of all of the religious doctrines, dogmas around it. And so I was in the process of deconstructing my former fundamentalist evangelical beliefs at the time that this happened, this awakening occurred. And in that degree, I was a little teeny bit awake. Like, I was definitely from the state I had been in prior to that powerful experience, and what I've been learning and growing in those couple 2-3 years since that initial experience, studying the teachings of Jesus, deconstructing. I'd been slowly awakening. I was getting to the point where I was seeing how Jesus taught that we're all one. I was seeing this, that when we look at our brother, our neighbor, we should just see Christ, and we should also just see ourselves. When we look at ourselves, we should see Christ. We should see Christ in everyone. He saw Christ in everyone. I think Mother Teresa, I think it is, has a beautiful quote about that. She did amazing, loving work in India, constantly surrounded by the suffering, and she was once asked, how are you able to constantly immerse yourself in such deep darkness and suffering all the time and not get dragged down into it yourself? And she said, when I look into the eyes of those that I'm into the eyes of the sufferers, essentially, all I see is Christ. And I think this realization was dawning on me at an intellectual level, but it was not yet at all, known on the heart level. It was coming close, I was being prepared for it, but there's a difference between knowing with your head, believing, and knowing with your whole being from experience. So, I was being cracked open, I was being prepared for this, but I wasn't really to the point where I could say I knew this as a truth. I was just beginning to really see it for the first time, slowly, little by little. And I was also still very attached to, clearly, my first dog as an adult. I had dogs as a child, but my first dog, Border Collie, she had been 10 years old at the time, and in the months immediately preceding this awakening experience, she had died a very sudden death, extremely fast-moving cancer. She was only 10, came out of nowhere, and it threw my life into a wreck, an absolute wreck. Clearly, I was very attached to my dog in a very unhealthy way. I loved her, but also had some very deep, unhealthy attachments, clearly. And I went into this deep, deep, deep depression. I don't know if definitely at the time, it was the most depressed I'd ever been. And this after several years of feeling that I had been pulled out of, long-term depression. But this was like a whole nother level. I didn't want to live. I didn't want to go on. She had been my whole life in this world, for sure. And it was a terrible experience, but as many people on this journey can acknowledge, suffering, especially the deeper the darkness, the more intense the suffering, the bigger the catalyst for awakening that event can be. And suffering is definitely a catalyst for awakening, and that's how it happened for me. One of the darkest points of my entire life led to one of the greatest points, I would say, profound awakening experience. So that was the experience I was having when the awakening occurred. I was plunged into this depression. Had lost my dog, hadn't let her go, but she was gone, but I was still clinging on to her in my mind. I couldn't be happy. All the stuff that goes with these attachments, strong attachments like this, takes time to let them go. Especially, I didn't realize how attached I was to her. I didn't realize how much I was relying on a dog, of all things, for my happiness. I had no idea till I lost her. So it was, maybe this happened in August, September end of August maybe of that year. In any event, that Christmas, I was visiting family back east. I lived in Montana at the time, going back east, going to visit the whole family, spend some time, I think Christmas, with my brother and his wife, also the parents, and then I think I was going to go back to my parents' house, also back east, different state, and stay with them maybe till the new year. And I had this intuition as the days were coming to the time that I was going to leave, take the flight, that something was going to change because of or during this journey. It was a very strong intuition. I could feel it very strongly. I kind of just shoved it aside. I'm like, I don't really care. Good, whatever, but right now it doesn't make a difference. My life is miserable. I hate my life, blah, blah, blah. But I didn't forget it. I knew. I didn't latch onto it and allow it to help bring me more peace. I just kind of, okay, cool, maybe that's true. But very interesting that I had that strong, like, intuitive hit before. Anyway, get on the plane, fly back east, have celebration. I'm still in this pretty depressed, dark state. Of course, I'm enjoying this darkness much more, being around family, and this is helping. And when the actual moment of awakening happened, it was very abrupt. I remember, I think we're driving from my brother's house in North Carolina to my parents' house in Kentucky, and I'm listening to Greg Braden videos. I had just stumbled upon Greg Braden for the first time, and the videos I was listening to was bringing me some semblance of peace. So I was like hunting down all the Greg Braden videos I could find. I don't know how I stumbled across that first one. I didn't know who he was, but for me, very helpful at that stage of my journey. So I'm listening to Greg Braden videos, and I don't remember when I watched this video. It could have been after we got back to the house. I don't recall exactly. I know exactly how it made me feel. I remember the event. I don't remember my physical location, but I remember I'd been binge watching some Greg Braden videos that day, and it was either later that day in the car ride home or that night, maybe the next day. But I was watching Greg Braden videos. Anyway, I get to the important video where my awakening occurs as I'm watching a Greg Braden video. And it's about letting go of things that have, fittingly for my situation, of course, letting go of situations that are gone. In reality, they're gone. And he mentioned some examples like a small restaurant that he loved to go to. And then, your small town grows and it's not a small town anymore. And the restaurant that you loved going to is not there anymore. And it's never coming back. But a part of you doesn't want to let it go, even though it's gone. And it just, reminisces over this. If only, those were the best days of my life. And so many of us do this in so many ways. It's not always negative things that tie us to the past. It's also positive experiences. We want only to experience that beautiful moment of the past again. And he was talking about this concept and also forgiveness, and how they're linked, how letting go and forgiveness, forgiving the thing that, good or bad, in our mind, the thing that took away the thing we missed that we don't want to let go. Forgive life, essentially. Yes, a beautiful thing that was a part of your life is gone, but more beauty can take its place. But only if we forgive life, or whatever we blame, So this was a long video, maybe a 2-hour video. It was a talk he was having, a recorded talk. And these are the concepts: letting go and forgiveness. This was kind of the topics of the video. And he gets to this point, and he's telling this story, another illustration. And this was the point where something inside me shifted, and this is where it all happened. But he's telling this story about this couple he knew, and you'll probably get a reason of why it really connected with me, because it was also a story about this couple and their dog and letting their dog go, their dog, the end of the dog's life. And they were struggling to let the dog go. Very similar to me. Mine, I was struggling to come to letting go of the dog even though she was already gone. They were struggling to let go of the dog while it was still alive, and it was suffering and in a lot of pain. They didn't want to let the dog go. And this went on for whatever, some weeks or something. But it was nearing the end of its life. It didn't have long left, and they knew this on an intellectual level, but they just, at a heart level, they were not ready to let go of the dog. And the dog was in increasing amount of pain, and this went on for some time. And I don't recall if there was a specific thing kind of triggered it for them, but they just came to this point of realization where they needed to let the dog go. They had a sense that they were holding the dog back and holding it in unnecessary pain. That it was, the dog's life was over. It was time, perfect timing. It needed to go, and it was going to happen regardless of whether, they were going to be at peace with it or not. But by not being at peace and by consciously holding on, the dog could sense this, and they had this sense that the dog was hanging on only because they weren't ready yet to let it go. And I've heard similar stories like this. I think pets especially, are very in tune with us, and I think this does happen at some level. If there's any physical way the dog can still hold on, it will. This actually happened to me. This was the one beautiful aspect. When my dog actually passed, she was doing, it went in waves up and down. She was doing really bad at the point that day that she died. She had plummeted from a high point, and she was doing really bad. Took her to the vet. The vet said, "You need to euthanize her." I was like, "Yeah, you've said this before." And then she had some of the best days she's had in this month of cancer since it was diagnosed as such. I think I'm gonna at least give it one more day, give her a chance to fight. And I remember she was in such bad shape. I had to carry her in my arms in from my work truck because I'd been working, and I'd gone straight from work, running my business, doing lawns or whatever, straight to the vet. Anyway, so I carry her from my truck into the house, and I'm sitting in the living room. She's laying there at my feet, and I'm talking to the roommates, sharing what happened. I'm in rough shape, but I've been in rough shape, just dealing with this, and I'm just day by day just doing it. And I can remember clearly she's asleep on the floor, the dog, and I'm telling my roommates that I want to give her a fighting chance, but if it's time for her to go and she's in so much pain she doesn't want to take it anymore, I'm okay. I'm okay with letting her go. At some level, I realized if she was in a lot of pain, I wanted to let her go, even no matter how hard that was going to be on me. I had no idea how hard it was going to be on me. But within minutes, maybe even just seconds, I would say within 2 minutes of when I said that, I don't remember exactly, but very shortly after I spoke those words, I don't know, if you know dogs, you'll understand, but when a dog has a dream or maybe a bad dream during their sleep, they kind of shake and do this thing. And I'll always comfort the dog and try to settle them down, settle their body down, just by touching them or whatever. And often this happens, and the shaking goes away and they don't even wake up. But I think it's a dream. That's my theory anyway. And anyway, this happened. And so I touched her to comfort her, and she woke up almost immediately, looked me directly in the eyes, and I could tell she consciously took one last breath as she looked me in the eyes. And she left very consciously. It was like she needed me to be there. She needed me to be with her. And I think at a deeper level, she needed to know that I was okay. And when she looked in my eyes, she saw I had that change in my heart. I was at some level ready to let her go. She could see that. The second she could see that, she was done. It was her time to go, and she went peacefully, quickly. So glad I did not euthanize her. Anyway, so I get this. I get that I think dogs hold on and other pets hold on if we're not ready to let them go. And at the very least, it makes it easier for them to let go if they know that we're also letting go of them. So I relate very much to this story. Back to the Greg Braden video. Similar thing. They're finally realizing that their refusal or their resistance to letting their sick dog go, was keeping it in perpetuating pain that was unnecessary. And they made the decision together, the husband and wife, that they were ready. If it was time for the dog to go, they're ready to let it go. And I think that very day, or the next day or something, the dog, similar to my story, peacefully went. And so you could see why such a story would be the story to really connect to me on a deep level. This is why I shared the specifics of how she went. So in that moment, something shifted in me as I'm hearing this story, and all of a sudden, I don't know how exactly, I don't know what was going on, but it was like all of that grief, all of that attachment, all of the resistance to letting her go, and the pain surrounding it, and like I said, the grief, so much grief, like, and pain, and the feeling like I'm alone, and she was my life, all of that, all of the pain and suffering, everything that goes with situations like this of grieving lost attachments and loved ones. It was in an instant gone. And I've never felt, I had at that point, never felt such a level of peace, deep inner peace within myself. It blew my mind. It blew my mind. Instantly, in a matter of seconds, this happened. It was just gone, and it was just replaced with peace and acceptance and surrender and love. Suddenly, I had been hating my life because I was so miserable. Suddenly, I was filled with life again. I was alive. Sadness was gone. There was no sadness. It was just whatever happened had allowed me to let go. And that act of letting go, very unconsciously, I believe, it was very unconscious, but something got severed that I was holding on to. And the second I unconsciously let go of it, this peace just came over me, and it was intense, and it was beautiful and amazing, and it didn't dissipate. That's the interesting thing. It didn't dissipate, it stayed. And as time went on, I began to realize that a huge part of this change, I was like a new person. I was seeing the world in a whole new light. Suddenly everything was less jaded, more beautiful. It was as if everything was radiating more light. It was like I stopped, without even realizing, it was like I stopped judging the world around me. I just saw it for what it is, and I accepted it, all of it. Accepting the loss of my dog, somehow that allowed me to accept everything in life. Like a whole new level of acceptance I had never experienced before. And so that was the big awakening experience. Over time, I began to realize at the heart of this, I had this new found connection to life. I was one with life in a way that I never, one with all that is, one with people around me, animals around me, and just life itself, everything, in a way I had never experienced before. And I didn't really consciously recognize that this was going on at the very beginning, but as this feeling continued on, this peace and this like heightened awareness and this joy and this like a new sense of inspiration that was coming from like a deeper level, more like heart-based consciousness, essentially. My whole consciousness was much more now in alignment with my heart than I had been before, and with love. And it was hard for me to put words on it at the time. All I knew is I hadn't done anything to my knowledge. I had just been going with the flow of life, as my intuition had clearly had some sense that this was going to happen. All I had to do was just go with it. I didn't have to feel better beforehand. I would feel better when the when life did its thing. And life did its thing, and it was out of my hands. That's how it felt. And then it was still out of my hands. And it was amazing. It was like, wow, life's out of my hands. And I feel better than ever. I don't need to be in control of my life. This is awesome. And so there is definitely a level of, I think, somewhat subconscious, but at some level I was feeling very much connected to life in a way, and to love, and to the light within me, and to everything outside of me in a way I had never had experienced before. And it took me a while for me to really consciously realize that this was at the heart of the shift within me. At the time, all I knew is, wow, this is great. And I didn't question it. I did not want to go back into that state of suffering and pain. So I just accepted it and went with it, and everything was different from that day forward. And no, my struggles were not done, and yes, the peace has, from that point on, there's been points where the inner peace diminishes, and it was not the end of my suffering. I was not suddenly enlightened, as the Buddha would say, the end of suffering, as the Buddha defined enlightenment. I was not instantly enlightened, but I was in an awakened state, a heightened level of awareness, of flow, of being present. All this was a part of it. I wasn't necessarily putting any of these words to it at the time. I was just in the experience, not really labeling it as anything. I was just experiencing this new awakened state. And I remember shortly thereafter, things just started to happen one after the other, like what I needed to know. New Age concepts that are honestly not New Age at all, and I don't even identify as New Age, but it was through New Age teachings, I guess, concepts, initially after that experience that made me aware of certain, from my perspective anyhow, deep spiritual truths about reality that I hadn't a clue about. All sorts of things. The books that I needed to read, that I resonated with, at exactly where I was at based on, based on my programming that would help me move forward in the right way, came to me. I remember just a few days after that experience, I was in my bedroom. I was still at my parents' house, but I was in the guest room, surfing the web, and I don't know how it happened, but I'm reading about the seven energy centers within the human body, chakras, as they're called in the East. And I believe chakra just means spinning wheel. It's just spinning vortexes of energy. In any event, I don't know how I found this page, but I stumbled across it, some New Age website talking about chakras, and it was amazing. And I could start to feel them. Like I could start to feel these energetic centers, and it was like I was learning something new, it seemed like. But at the same time, at another level, it was like, I know this already. I know this. I'm not learning anything. I'm remembering. And this is how it went for several months after this period. Even after I went back home, got back into my life, running my business, doing my thing in Montana, back living with roommates, which was a situation that was not going to last very much longer. But it didn't matter that there was a lack of resonance there and a stronger dissonance, which is just life showing me that I needed to part ways. It was time to move on, and I did. And that was the next major thing that happened in 2019, May of that year, when the pressure to leave the roommate situation got so strong that I spent one night journaling all night, went to work the next day. I think I was doing power raking for some lawns. I had this download, and I instantly knew the path that I needed to take without any thought of my own. It just came into my head. By the end of that same day, I had accepted it, and I knew exactly what to do. I knew the steps I needed to take. I was going to take a massive leap of faith. It was clearer than ever. It was time to be done with this roommate situation, and the way I was going to get out, the way life seemed to be telling me was the way I needed to do it, was to sell my business, and as much of my material, all of my material things essentially that didn't fit in my Subaru, and embark on a journey of faith in the camping lifestyle and living off-grid, traveling and camping. And so that's what I did. And between the initial awakening experience and that giant leap of faith, which I absolutely am certain could not have happened until I had stepped into this new level, of awakening. And it was as if something inside of me, this is the best way I can describe it based on how I felt at the time, it was as if a part of me woke up that I had for the most part been entirely unaware was even there. And this new awakened part of me was now calling the shots. And all I had to do was sit back and let this new awakened aspect of me lead the way. And in times when that newfound sense of peace diminished, or old negative thought patterns creep back in, I get pulled out of the present moment, or whatever happens, it was because the I that I used to identify with, the ego, as I now label it, at the time I didn't have any clue about any of these things. I just knew there was a new awakened aspect of me, and it was calling the shots. It was, I would say, the awakening Christ light within us, the true self, as they would say in the East, the self, not the false self, obviously, true self, who we really are, our soul. It was like my soul was awakening into what it and who it truly was. Divine light and love, essentially, encased in this body. The ego program, all the fear programming, is prison for our minds. Anyway, so pretty amazing. And in the months between that and that big leap of faith, that initial spiritual awakening and leap of faith, it was rather effortless. Day-to-day life went on, but I mean, the books that I needed, I found them. They appeared, and the websites I needed to read, and the people that I needed to come into contact with, and on and on and on. And it was amazing, full of synchronicity, and necessary. I needed to be in that new, somewhat awakened state in order to have the faith to take that leap of faith, leave everything I had known behind, my business that I built from scratch for 10 years, my home. This was the longest I lived in any single place now, was Bozeman, Montana. Growing up, we moved a lot, our family did, and I didn't particularly like moving, maybe, and so it took a lot of faith to give all this up, and not only give it all up, but not knowing, without a plan, with no mental plan of what to do next. And that act of faith, demonstration of faith, had great reward. It actually led me here to where I'm at on this beautiful property. I would call it my dream property. I don't own it, I'm just a renter, but it's essentially free rent. It's so dirt cheap. It's beautiful here. And in the physical sense, it's my dream property. It has a creek flowing through it. None of that, none of this, where I'm at now, and so much awesome life lessons and experiences, beautiful experiences along the way, would have never happened if I didn't take that leap of faith. And I don't think I would have had the will, the inner strength, confidence, the faith. I don't think I would have had the faith to take that leap of faith like I did if I hadn't had that spiritual awakening. So, that was made not very many months after the awakening, and by October, that year flew by. By October, that was the date I set, and off I went. First to a campsite in Montana, stayed there a couple weeks, and then started heading south, because it was, fall, time to go into warmer weather. If you're going to be living in a tent, even if you got a canvas tent with a wood stove, you still don't necessarily want to be doing that in Montana year-round. At least I didn't. And I got to see much of the country I hadn't seen. So one more important aspect of the awakening in that same time frame, like I said, it's a journey that's continued on for like 7 years since then. 6-7 years since I had that first initial awakening, and like almost 10 years since I first started paving the way for that awakening experience by doing my best to follow the teachings of Jesus and cultivate an inner relationship with the Christ within, with the God within. And so I do this journey. It's not all smiles and roses, obviously, but it's a great experience. At some point along this journey, I think about a year or less in, I'm actually in New Mexico, where I'm also at now, not anywhere remotely close to where I'm currently at physically, but in the same state, ironically, of where I actually ended up settling down for the time period when I stopped camping, was New Mexico. I've been in several places in New Mexico since, but that's just kind of a side note, interesting side note of how life works. It definitely doesn't always take us to where we think we're going to go. I would have never imagined New Mexico, but I was camping in New Mexico at the time, and I thought it was a wonderful place to camp, not a great place that I would ever want to settle down, haha. That's what my thinking at the time. But hey, I was camping in New Mexico and doing a lot of meditation on this journey because I'm out in nature, just writing, making a few videos, getting to know myself like I'd never known before. I felt almost like a wandering yogi in the woods, trying to find myself, the greater purpose in my life. Anyway, so I'm doing a lot of meditation, pretty much daily meditation. On this particular day, I'm meditating. Very powerful, spiritually transformative experience happened. So, and this, I would say, is integrally linked to my initial spiritual awakening experience. It took the two of these experiences put together for me to really know, like 100% the truth that I now claim as my truth, that we are all one. This is a dream. All of this didn't happen until I experienced it in a very direct way. So I'm meditating, and my mind is still, and these words pop into my head. It's a verse from the Bible. It's found in Isaiah, I believe, and then it's requoted in the Gospel of Matthew. But those who sat in darkness saw a great light. This popped into my head out of nowhere. I was just sitting there in stillness, and this thought, this line, this saying popped into my mind, and instantly my mind, which was in a state of, dark stillness, inner stillness, not darkness in a bad way, but darkness. My mind was literally filled with light, the brightest light you can imagine, like the divine light that's spoken of in near-death experiences. And it was as if I was transported outside of my body. Very much it felt like I was not in my body, and yet I was feeling my bodily sensations, and I knew at that level I was still in my body, but it was like some aspect of my consciousness was not in my body, because this light that I was now engulfed in and a part of, and that was a part of me, was far more than my body. It's very hard to put into words, but I could, obviously this light was within me, but this light was not limited to me. This was the light that everything is in, and that is in everything, and that everything is. And it was very loving, very warm, very ecstatic feeling. I don't know how long this experience lasted, but it had to be at least 10 minutes. It was incredible, and my awareness kept shifting from purely in the light, where I felt completely detached from my body, and then simultaneously it would shift back to like partial body awareness, where I could feel bodily sensations while simultaneously still being in the light. And then I would shift back to being fully in the light and not even aware of my body, and back and forth. And in the times, at some point when I was, partial body awareness, I felt an energy surge up my spine, like very strong, Perhaps that's what some people would call a kundalini awakening. I've never called it a kundalini awakening. I know it's what they call the kundalini energy, absolutely no doubt. In any event, it was definitely that energy, life force energy, surging up my spine, and simultaneously with this light that had blasted out of nowhere into my mind, through my mind. Now it's everywhere, it's surrounding me. I'm like in this ball of light. I am this ball of light, and yet this light is beyond me. There's no time. I was completely outside of time, space. From that moment on, I know without a shadow of a doubt that linear time, completely an illusion. Space as we know it, an illusion. It's not the ultimate reality. That light is the ultimate reality of what I am, and that light connects all of us together as one. And I now knew this beyond any shadow of a doubt through direct experience. And eventually I think maybe it was becoming a bit overwhelming, the energy, so maybe I consciously decided I had had enough. I think is somewhat how it went down. Maybe 10-20 minutes into this experience, I open my eyes and it fades away. And but I'm left in the most present state of being I've ever been in. There was literally, I tried to think about a past thought. I could not think of a past thought. I could not think about the future. It was it was impossible. I couldn't do it. That's the kingdom of heaven that's within us, is that state of perfect presence, so anchored in the present moment that even if we want to think about like a past thought, that's how like in the present we are. Would take some serious effort to like drag up a memory. I couldn't do it. And the whole rest of the day, this must have been around noon maybe, or late morning or something, but the whole rest of the day, all afternoon, I went for a walk. Everything was magical. Everything, the whole world, nature around me already enchanting. I love the nature. I love the outdoors. Beautiful. But it was beautiful in a new way. And the burnt trees had been a wildfire at that location where I was in the mountains. They were almost glimmering, not like literally I wasn't seeing light, but they were like glimmering. Even the burnt trees that were ugly were no longer ugly. They were like shimmering with this new invisible light. And man, I've never had such a sustained moment of complete, absolute presence, to the point where I can't even bring up a past memory, even if I try. And so between that experience and the previous spiritual awakening experience, I guess together, to me, form like my spiritual awakening. But the journey goes on, and the journey goes on. Perhaps those like Eckhart Tolle have one awakening experience, and it's so overwhelming, it's just that's it, and then they're just in that state of presence pretty perfectly for the rest of their life on this earth. But for like 99.99% of us, that is not the way it works. There's a lot of work to do from the initial awakening to the point where we can be more firmly, more like all the time anchored in that presence. And even then we're still growing and developing and learning, and I don't think it ever ends. I think the expansion just continues and continues and continues. And that's, to me, what the spiritual awakening journey is. It's expansion. That's what happened in both of those two very powerful experiences of mine that I would call awakening experiences. My awakening was an expansion of consciousness. I think that's it. That's my story, and obviously the journey goes on, but that's the story I wanted to share in this video. So hope you appreciated this. If you're on the same journey of awakening, similar journey of awakening, feel free, please do share below in the comments below your own personal experiences, if you feel led to. I'd love to hear. I love to hear. I've heard so many, and I don't think I'll ever get tired of hearing the various stories of awakening that people on this journey, in this great collective awakening, are having. They're all so unique, and yet they're all so, at some level, so much the same. And so it's just amazing. And yeah, have a wonderful day. I think that's it. That's my story. I think I said everything I wanted to say. So have a wonderful day, wonderful week. I'll be back. Until then, this has been Jason.